Hello and welcome back to another episode of Notion Bonsai. And today we're going to be creating bonsai from a Hinoki cypress. So this is the tree that we're going to be working on here today. I actually quite like Hinoki as a species because it's got this really beautiful dense growth pattern, which is quite desirable whenever you're working on a much larger tree and you're trying to create them little dense pads on the tree. Just from how the Hinoki grows, it almost does it itself. And on top of that, it's got a luscious green, very vibrant green color to it, which I think looks quite beautiful. Some Hinokis, especially the larger bonsais, can be quite expensive. Even this little tiny blob of a Hinoki that I have here, I think cost me £18. So the tools that I'll be using today are a root hook or a chopstick, a bonsai root rake or a bent fork, some gin pliers, twig cutters, wire cutters, and finally some root pruning shears. Because this Hinoki came from a garden center and not a bonsai nursery, I can already tell that this is probably planted deeper than it needs to be. So I'm gonna get this out of the pot here just to see how much trunk we can reveal. It's got a nice sort of granular wood chip here. It's actually cork through this. All right, and it's got a lovely set of healthy roots, which is a good sign. So I'm just gonna take this root hook and start to remove the top layer of soil just to see how far down the trunk really goes. And as I see here, it goes down quite a bit more. There's a lot of this we don't need on the top. Yeah, I think it's covered in a layer of mulch just to protect the roots. So we're starting to reveal a nice trunk now here. It's just loosening up the old soil. And as a tip, if you are doing this, I would advise drying the tree out a few days before you repot so that the soil is a little bit easier to remove. This one here was just covered in a layer of mulch, which stopped it drying out so quick. So if I had left this in here any longer, the roots could have started to rot. That's one of the reasons why we use a nice free draining soil mix in bonsai to allow lots of air into the roots so that you don't get any fungal problems. The roots can grow a lot easier, and as a result, the tree thrives. And I can tell at the bottom here, it's got quite an unconventional root flare. And with Hinoki cypress, they're usually grafted at the base onto another piece of rootstock, which I don't think this one is. When it comes to repotting Hinoki cypress, they're good to repot every other year, so every 2 years. So I'm just gonna turn this on its side now and begin to rake and loosen up the soil from the bottom. And of course, because this is a young tree, I'll probably be repotting it every 2 years. But of course, with older specimen bonsai trees, they kind of slow down as they get older in their growth. So maybe with older trees, you could maybe repot every 4 years, sometimes even longer. Always work away from the trunk. That way you're not tearing through any roots across. It's always good to keep a spray bottle of water nearby as you work on the roots also, just in case the roots begin to dry out, and you can just give them a little mist to keep them alive. So well, that root's looking really strange there, isn't it? The way it comes down here. And this is what we are left with now. I didn't remove any root whatsoever. I simply loosened up the old soil. So this is all of the soil that I've removed. There was quite a lot in that pot. So after having a good look at this tree, I can tell it's not grafted, which is really great because often with grafts at the bottom of Hinoki cypress, they can swell up as the tree gets older, and there's really no getting rid of that unless you maybe air layer the top off. So the trunk line comes down this way, and then it sort of stops here with no roots coming from that area. I thought at first maybe that's a taproot and the root base starts here, but if I look around this way, the trunk loops back on itself. So this was probably once a taproot that had curled up and then thickened. I quite like this root up high here. So it's really annoying how this loops back and around. And personally, I don't like how this root comes down and loops up and around. Apart from this root here and this root here, everything is connected to that looping root. And I feel like it would be too dangerous for the tree to remove so much at the one time. But what I can do is encourage more roots to come out from this area. So in the future, whenever we've got plenty up here, I can then remove this bottom piece that loops back on itself entirely. I'm just going to take my root pruning shears and just shorten the roots ever so slightly. And now what I'm going to do to try and get roots in this area here, I'm going to take these scissors and make one little stab hole like that. Barely even see it. I'll do a few in this area. So you can't even see the stab holes that I've made on the trunk there. But what I'm going to do is just cover this with a little, ever so slightly tiny bit of rooting hormone. And this is a commercial grade rooting hormone that I'm painting onto the trunk here. It has the active ingredient IBA, which stands for indole 3-butyric acid. And I've just put this here in the hopes that it goes into the little stab marks that we have made and stimulates root growth in this area. Now we're going to pot this up. So the pot that I have chosen to plant this hinoki in is a beautiful blue ceramic glazed bonsai pot. But I have chosen this pot because in color theory, blue and green are harmonious colors that go well with each other. And I feel that the beautiful vibrant green from the hinoki cypress would go really nice with the subtle blueness of the pot. So as I prepare this pot, I'm just going to leave this hinoki in a little basin of water. And it's okay to leave trees in water like this so long as you don't leave them too long and they drown. For like 5-10 minutes, it'll be fine. So I've just cut 2 little squares of drainage mesh to go in the holes here. I'm gonna take some 2mm aluminium bonsai wire, cut a little length of it, and a little bit here. And I'm gonna make a U shape, and then that goes through the wire, through the pot, and then I'm just gonna flatten it down on the side. Now the soil mix that I'm gonna be putting this into is going to be a mix of pumice, akadama, and lava rock. But because hinokis tend to like to be in a really moist soil, but not soggy, through that normal bonsai soil mix, I'm going to sprinkle through some sphagnum moss, just a little bit, in small amounts throughout the soil. It's not going to be like a ball of moss around the root ball. It's just going to be distributed evenly throughout the whole soil mix. Now when it comes to positioning the tree in the pot, I still want this to look nice, so I'm always thinking about maybe, do I want the tree planted at an angle, like an informal upright? Do I want to tilt it forwards or backwards? And then also, how high do I want it to sit in the pot? And all these factors will determine how it looks in the end, so it's good to keep them in mind as you repot. So I'm just noticing here now the roots are quite long for the pot here, and if I try and stuff these in, they're going to end up winding around and around. So any of the roots that comes to the edge of the pot, I'm just going to prune off. I think it looks pretty good like that. I might make it maybe a little bit higher, so I'm going to put a little mound of soil there. So perhaps like this. I'm just going to twist the tree to get it lower. I'd be happy with that if it was able to stay in place there. So I'm going to take the wire that I put through the pot now and just wire it into position, making sure that as I pull the wire through, I don't crush any of the nice roots. Then here, I'm just going to twist this piece to hold the tree in place, and I can tighten it off with the gin pliers. I don't want this to be too tight where it starts to bite into the trunk, just tight enough where it will hold the tree from falling over or moving in the pot. And we can come back later in the year and remove that wire. With hinoki, you can pretty much get an instant bonsai like this, but I'm only going to keep this in this pot until it fills the pot. So it will look nice for a while, and then once it fills the pot, I'm probably going to put it into a larger pot, maybe next year. That will help me get this trunk thicker. So for this first year, it's just to get it to look a little bit nicer. Now that it's nice and potted, let's take a look at the top of this tree. Now because we have removed some roots of the tree, there could end up being too much foliage on the top here for the roots to be able to feed all of it. So because of this, I'm going to remove some of the foliage, and I also think the tree could do with being thinned out. So what I'm going to do is remove any weak growth on the tree, which is growth that's maybe growing on the elbows of branches, and I'm also going to remove any branches that I believe could be a problem in the future. Here on the trunk there is 3 branches quite close to each other, 1, 2, 3, and as these thicken over time, maybe to the same thickness of this branch, we could get what's known as inverse taper, which is a swelling on the trunk of the area where there's too many branches. So I'm going to have to remove maybe 1 or 2 of these. I'm thinking of removing this one here first of all, because it's directly opposite that branch. That's what's known as handlebar branches. So let's just cut that off. Spaces it out a little. These are quite close together. Could cut here. On the bottom of the tree here, there's 2 branches very close to each other. I'm going to remove this one because it's growing right at the elbow of that one. If you look here, there is a branch that's at the very base of the tree. It could be removed now and you could continue styling your bonsai, but what I'm going to do with this branch is keep it for whenever I put this tree into a larger pot next year. And this is what's known in bonsai as a sacrificial branch. A branch that's kept so that it will thicken the base of the tree for you, and then once it has done its job, you will then sacrifice the branch or cut it off, so you'll be able to get that nice thickness at the bottom, tapering up. So I've thinned out the foliage quite a lot here. You can actually see the trunk line. Now just to give this a little shape, I'm going to put some wire around the trunk. I'm going to be using 2mm wire. So first I'm going to measure it. I'm going to stab it into the pot for an anchor. Then I'm going to come around the tree. I'm going to make sure I avoid that sacrificial branch just so that it doesn't get trapped. And if you can't get a Hinoki cypress to work on as a tree, I would also recommend getting a Thuja occidentalis, which has a similar growth pattern to the Hinoki. It's a good practice tree before you get one, if you're just looking to start off with something in bonsai. And a good time to prune the Hinoki cypress is spring and summer. So let's see if we can give this a little shape now. Sometimes I actually prefer Hinokis to have a nice straight trunk. I actually kind of prefer it like that. So instead of using wire to bend the tree into a shape, I've actually used the wire to straighten the tree. Now I think if I just wire these branches out, it'll have a really nice shape. And for that, I'm going to use 1.5mm wire. And now just in case you're new to bonsai, I'm going to show you how you can wire 2 branches. First, going to measure the wire that I'm going to use. I cut it here. And over time, you sort of learn with experience how much wire that you need. But in bonsai, we do what's known as the 2-branch principle, where we wire 2 branches together with 1 piece of wire. And that way, each branch is anchored to the other branch, so the wire doesn't slip. So I'm going to start by putting this wire here in at the elbow of this branch and just winding it around the first branch. You want each bend of the wire to be about maybe 45-degree angle. Depending on the type of bend that you want to do, the angle will change. But just in general, a 45-degree angle bend should be good for beginners. So after wiring to this branch, I've gone around the trunk once and I'm coming up and around this branch. As I get to the end of the branch, I'm not tightening the wire so tightly. I'm just creating a little loose coil to more guide the branch instead of force it into a way of growing. Now that these 2 branches are wired, I should be able to just bend this one just where I like it, and that one. I'm just going to shorten the foliage on this, thin it out a little. And whenever you cut the cypress, you never really want to cut through the foliage like this, because you get lots of browning on these areas and it doesn't look very nice. Instead, if you come into one of the stems and cut it that way, just like you would a juniper, that's how you would thin out the foliage. So I've thinned out the foliage a little bit more, cut off another branch here that I thought was a little bit too crowding. But apart from that, that's all I'm going to do to this tree today. I just want to let this tree now get healthy. I'm going to let the upper branches thicken and they'll be wired in the future. But all that's left to do now is give this tree a water. And now, as a bonus part of this video, we're going to be propagating the little off-cuttings that we took from the Hinoki into this little seed tray or propagation tray. So I'm just going to fill this with the soil that we took off of the Hinoki. No point wasting nice, good bonsai soil on some cuttings. These are the type of cuttings that I'm going to take here. Very small. And whenever you take a cutting, it's always a good idea to plant it half as deep as the cutting is. Again, I'm just painting on some of this rooting hormone just to help it root. I'm going to use this paintbrush to make a little hole, and in it goes. If they root, I'll be happy. If they don't root, I don't mind so much. Alright, so I think that's as many cuttings I can take from that. The rest is just really, really young growth that I don't think I can take from a cutting. You got nothing to lose by trying to see if it works. Let's get this into the greenhouse. And I think these will do well right beside the little Itoigawa cuttings we got here. I'm gonna keep this on to keep it nice and humid. That's good. And now I would just like to end off this video by saying that in autumn, Hinoki cypress tends to go a little bit orange, sometimes brown, sheds off old foliage for new growth. And if it's your first time growing a Hinoki for beginners, this can be a little bit alarming as it seems like your Hinoki's dying. But if the tree was in good health beforehand, it's more than likely it's just shedding its foliage. Please remember to leave a like in this video if you enjoyed and it helped you out with creating a Hinoki bonsai. Let me know what you thought of my styling in the comments. Is there anything you would like to do differently? I'm always open to new ideas. And if you'd like to keep up to date with the things that I do off camera, please check out my Instagram. It's at Notion Bonsai. You'll be able to see all my pictures and things on there. But on that, thank you so very much for watching.